مایک پمپئو وزیر خارجه آمریکا 2021. خانم رجوی، شما کار بزرگی انجام دادید و رهبری شما در شورای ملی مقاومت ایران زیرساخت‌های یک جمهوری آزاد، مستقل و دموکراتیک را در ایران می‌سازد.
شما همچنان الهام بخش هستید. شما الهام بخش همه ما هستید. ما به همان آرمانی معتقدیم که این معترضان برای آن می جنگند که مردم ایران دیگر تحت حاکمیت این رژیم سرکوبگر زندگی نکنند. این رژیمی است که بدون شک نیرویی برای شرارت در سراسر جهان است. زمانی که وزیر خارجه آمریکا بودم، شاهد آن بودم.
همونطور که من این معترضان را تماشا می کنم، همونطور که امروز مردم را در خیابان‌های پاریس می بینم، همونطور که همه شما را در این سالن می بینم، امید زیادی دارم. معتقدم جنبشی که ما شاهد آن هستیم، به رهبری همه شما به وضوح با آنچه در گذشته دیده ایم متفاوت است.
این قیام ها را زنان رهبری کردند و جوانان ایرانی پیشتاز آن بودند. آنها خواستار اصلاحات نیستند، آنها خواستار آزادی هستند. اعتراضات در ایران محصول مداخله خارجی نیست. رژیم دروغ میگوید. این اعتراضات نتیجه 40 سال مقاومت سازمان یافته است.
وظیفه ما این بود که هرچه در توان داریم انجام بدهیم تا به رهایی مردم سراسر جهان و داخل ایران از شر سپاه پاسداران و جلاد آن قاسم سلیمانی کمک کنیم.
It is an enormous privilege to address you all today. And I'm sorry I can't be with you there in person, but I can feel the love and the patriotism for Iran in the room, and it is great to be back with you all. Be with so many great leaders, too. I see Prime Minister Harper, Vice President Pence, I see Senator Lieberman, and of course, it's wonderful to again get to be virtually only with you, Madam Rajavi. You have done work, and your leadership of the National Council of Resistance of Iran is laying the groundwork for a free, sovereign, and democratic republic in Iran. Bless you for all that you have done for the people of Iran. I also want to take just a minute to acknowledge the bravery and sacrifice of so many Iranians. I've come to know some of them who have made their way out of the country. I've watched these protesters protest the regime's brutality since September of last year. For 10 months now, their outcry has been heard around the world. And they should know, you should know, the people of Iran who are listening to this today inside of the country know that you continue to be heard all around the world. You remain an inspiration. You remain an inspiration for all of us. Look, we're all here today because we believe in the same cause. We believe in the same cause that these protesters are fighting for. That one day, the Iranian people will no longer live under the brutal, oppressive regime that has sat in Tehran since 1979. We all know this regime. It's a regime that crushes its people and makes a mockery of the noble history of this great nation. It's a regime that is undoubtedly a force for evil all across the world. We see it I lived it when I was America's Secretary of State. We've seen this evil, especially over these past months. So many Iranian protesters murdered for exercising their most fundamental rights, and many, many more imprisoned because of the simple acts of faith and patriotism they have demonstrated. As far back as 2010, I spoke of the Iranian people and their history. That's now almost 15 years ago. I spoke of the Iranian people's kindness, the Iranian people's respect for knowledge and reason and human life. Iranians want to prosper in their faith and their culture, and they simply want to allow their families and their nation to thrive. I must say, as I watch these protesters, as I see the people in the streets of Paris today, as I see all of you in this room, I have enormous hope. I believe that the movement we're seeing, led by all of you, is clearly different than what we've seen in the past. These uprisings have been led by women and spearheaded by Iranian youth. They're not calling for reform, they're calling for freedom, something that is deeply consistent with Iranian history. Now, you all know this. You all know. You'll watch the tweets today from the regime. The Ayatollah's regime will try to discredit the protesters and you. Claim that the movement is being directed by foreign agitators. I guess that would be me. Or the protesters are advocating for the return of the Shah's dictatorship. But this isn't from outside in. This isn't about foreign agitators. This is about the Iranian people and Iranians across the world who understand basic freedom. And we, every one of them, just as the Vice President was a few minutes ago, we should be clear. This fools no one, least of all the folks in this room today. The slogans heard all over Iran daily, they reject the Ayatollah's future. As we watch the protest unfold over these last months, we've not seen a movement in disarray, with many warring factions vying for acclaim. We've seen unity. We've seen a unified people demonstrating incredible bravery and cooperation to bring this regime down. It's been clear from Kurdistan to Sistan and Baluchistan, and from Arabs in Khuzestan to the capital itself in Tehran. Every religion, every ethnicity, they've remained unified in their opposition to this regime and their hope and their deep prayers for a better future. You all know this. The movement we're seeing isn't over because we're seeing the true nation of Iran rebelling against its longtime oppressor. And I'll never forget, we should never forget, that this fight is coming at dear cost. Some estimates indicate that nearly 700 protesters have already been killed, while between 20 and maybe as many as 30,000 have been arrested. Regime officials have threatened to begin mass execution of the protesters in an effort to crush the protests. And their efforts to murder and maim all across the world remain strong. But protests in Iran remind us all that freedom matters, that this is something that's worth fighting for. When General Soleimani was threatening Americans, and we took him out, we made sure he didn't kill another American, we made sure he didn't prosecute another Iranian. It was our responsibility to do what we could to help secure freedom for people all across the world and inside of Iran, from the IRGC and their henchman Qasem Soleimani. We help them because we know that the Iranian regime will consistently and forever oppose freedom, and we cannot permit this tyranny to stand. We know, too, that the regime, first and foremost, it opposes freedom inside of its own borders. We've seen this over the last 10 months. The outcry of innocent Iranians has been met with brutality. But the Ayatollah's regime doesn't limit its wicked scheme to the Iranian people. That regime in Tehran has long been the world's foremost state sponsor of terrorism. We see the precision-guided missiles with Hezbollah continues to build the capacity to rapidly develop not only a nuclear weapon, but an entire weapons program. And it lies about that very program. Allowing this regime to prosper means that the cause of freedom will suffer within its borders and beyond. Why? For 4 years, we worked so hard to crush it during my time as Secretary of State by applying every ounce of pressure and bringing along partners and allies who were willing to help isolate the regime. For the first time, we put the regime at its weakest point in 40 years. Iranians from every corner of the nation could see the regime's epic incompetence that had brought ruin to their homeland. Food, gas, other basic staples had become unaffordable, not because of American sanctions, but because of the regime's action and its kleptocracy. The nation's ability to respond to natural disasters like floods and earthquakes demonstrate the incompetence, the arrogance, and the evil of the regime. It handled the COVID pandemic in a way that harmed the Iranian people as well. Look, all of this makes clear that Iran's not working. The people know it, reminding the whole world that there remains a passion for freedom within the country. I'm saddened that their message now seems to be falling on deaf ears. Certainly in the United States, it's being ignored in the very places most important for it to be heard. I'm sure you've all read that in recent weeks, governments in Europe, as well as the Biden administration in the United States, have been pushing again, like a zombie, to strike a deal with the Iranian regime. Sanctions relief, releasing $7 billion from the Republic of Korea, giving it to the Iranian regime. As President Biden and Rob Malley are abandoning the Iranian people and enriching their oppressors, we cannot permit this to happen because the regime is committed to crushing its own people and spreading terror and mayhem abroad. The Biden administration's blind desire to appease and negotiate has made the world a more dangerous place. This is an utter betrayal of the Iranian people, and cutting a deal would grant the regime legitimacy. We should note it would also enrich it with an influx of cash and resources and authority. And we know this for sure. This wealth would not go to food and medicine and security for the Iranian people, but it would be used for evil. Does anyone in this room really believe that the despots in Tehran will use it to help the Iranian people? Of course not. It's laughable. We know that any deal will only further enable the regime to brutally oppress its people. But that's not all. What resources the regime does not use to inflict pain and suffering on its own people will be used to attack free people all around the world. In Israel, in Ukraine, in Europe, in the United Kingdom, and indeed inside of the United States. If we believe in the cause of freedom, if we think it still matters from Ukraine to Iran, then we cannot condone the lifting of sanctions on the Iranian regime. Period, full stop. We must instead call on our leaders to support the brave Iranians who stand in opposition to their despotic government. They're not the product of foreign meddling, these protests. They're not some outside agitator. They are the fact that we know that the regime is lying and the Iranian people are speaking truth against the regime. They're the result of 40 years of organized opposition. Now I pray that this will be the time for America and all nations who value freedom to truly support them. This failed U.S. policy that we're seeing today shows a lack of support for these women in Iran who are risking their own lives. It remains the case that we cannot shower the Ayatollah with money and economic benefit in the prayer and the hope that it won't be used to inflict terror and oppression. Instead, human rights, counterterrorism must continue to be at the center of our Iran policy. If we want to keep Iran from obtaining a nuclear weapon, we have to apply pressure until the regime changes. And that the foremost way, we know this, the foremost way to accomplish this is to support those inside of Iran in actively working to seek a government that loves them and honors them and treats them well. Look, I'm hopeful. The world's learned a lot about the theocracy in the last 10 months. We've seen that its continued existence will make the world a far more unstable and dangerous place. The regime's brutality has been on display for the world to see, and there could be no path forward other than supporting the Iranian people. We can't negotiate with men like Raisi. His crimes against humanity back in 1988 and the crimes he is now committing every day make him unsuited to even have a conversation with decent human beings. I know that some of you in this room today have loved ones who are currently imprisoned in Evan and elsewhere, or have loved ones who have been disappeared or worse. I'll never forget any of them. I know you won't either. We pray for them. A bit earlier, the Vice President quoted President Reagan. I want to add to that. President Reagan used to say that this will all end when we win and they lose. That is true for the Iranian people who must win and a regime that must lose. I know that your work will continue to make that more likely each day. Thank you, God bless you, and may the Lord protect the Iranian people as they build a peaceful, prosperous Iranian nation. Thank you for having me here today. Good luck and God bless to all of you.